Well, good day everybody and welcome back to the channel. So I use older video cameras. I do not stay on the cutting edge of the technology treadmill when it comes to cameras because you can only stay on the cutting edge for 5 minutes before the next upgrade is released. That being said, I have a number of older cameras I use. I have 3 micro four thirds cameras, an old G5, this G7, which is the only of my micro four thirds that shoots 4K in a crop mode, and the GH3, which is a more video optimized camera. It shoots a really good 1080p quality, but it doesn't shoot 4K. And then I have 2 other cameras. I have the little Canon Vixia 80 camcorder right here, and I also have the little GoPro Hero 7 Black. And both the Canon camcorder and the GoPro action camera have certain special use cases that I think I find them handy for. And also, the Lumix G7 has certain use cases that work really well. And I thought I would just cover these 3 older cameras. And maybe you're interested in finding them. Actually, the G7 is a new camera in the sense that they still sell them. These are kind of older cameras, and I thought it would be fun to go through and just see what do I find valuable for each one of these in making videos. So stay tuned. Well, so here is the GoPro Hero 7 Black. I'm using the external microphone with a microphone adapter. The mic is a Comica, C-O-M-I-C-A, a comical mic, yes. Okay, it's a warm morning here in Albuquerque. It'll get over 100 today, 100 Fahrenheit, certainly better than 100 centigrade. Hey, well, this is the primary advantage or use case for these action cameras if you want to be a YouTube creator, is the idea of walking around and talking. These have great stabilization, and they really are the best kind of camera as far as stabilized scene while you're walking, but they have very tiny sensors, and therefore you're not going to get that selective focus. You're not going to be able to throw the background out of focus with these kind of cameras. But I think the trade-off is between a shaky picture versus blurry background. I would rather take a picture not shaky. So I think where these action cameras, especially like the GoPro Hero 7 Black, where its best use case is going to be shooting outdoors in brighter light. I have studio lighting here. I got 400 watt equivalent bulbs, but it's not super good video, especially in the darker, like the shadows. Like you can see in this black shirt, there is some color noise, what's called chroma noise, that the better cameras like my micro four thirds don't have. And also, because this is a fixed focus camera, it's optimized for infinity focus essentially. If you want to shoot handheld video where you're within an arm's length of the camera lens, you're going to have to add your own little close focus filter, which I've done here. This is the little Hoya, this is a +4 close-up filter, and it threads into this cage, this camera box that takes these filter mounts. But you have to kind of use that if you want to use it as a close-up walkie-talkie kind of camera. So this close-up filter does degrade the edges of the image slightly. Okay, so now this is the GoPro, and it has that close-up filter on it, and I'm like only a couple inches away from the typewriter's mechanism. Because you have fixed focus, you're not really going to focus really well. Like by the time you get really close in there, you're obviously losing focus, and it's just not as good of a setup as the Canon, as the little camcorder, I think. So you can use these for kind of close-up kind of shots, but they're not ideal, these action cameras. So the best use case for this camera is really when you're walking and talking outdoors in bright light. It's fun to do, you know, walking, talking videos. They're great, and I've used this a lot. It has great stabilization for that. That's its best use case. Okay, I'm recording on the Panasonic Lumix G7. This is a micro four thirds camera. This was the first Panasonic Lumix camera that shot 4K video. It shoots a cropped 4K video. And if you're interested in using this kind of camera for video work and you want to use 4K, you have to be aware that because it does crop the picture in a little bit, you're going to have to go with an extra wide lens in order to get a kind of a normal angle of view. So In my selection of Panasonic Lumix lenses, the widest one I have is 14 millimeter. It's an autofocus lens. I have actually a couple of them that go wide enough to 14 millimeters, but the only one that I had was wider was this 12 millimeter Rokinon f2. It's actually a T 2.2 cinema lens. It's a manual focus lens, however, and so it works really pretty good for this use case. I'm an arm's length away from the lens, and it's a pretty good angle of view. I'm not real up close to it, even in the 4K mode that we're shooting in right now. So I'm shooting in 24p 4K mode, crop 4K mode, so I'm using a 50th of a second shutter speed. This is what filmmakers call a 180-degree shutter angle. It kind of refers to the old rotating shutters in film, motion picture film cameras, but basically if you set your shutter speed to twice the frame rate, then you'll get, ooh, I'm too bright here, then you'll get natural looking motion blur. See how that motion blur looks natural? Whereas if you shoot at a really super high frame rate, it'll have kind of a strobe effect, which is good for sports, for instance, but not good for that natural look. And so I'm shooting at my lowest ISO. The lens is wide open, so I have to use a neutral density filter to be able to get normal shutter angle, a good blur in motion, a natural looking blur, while still having the lens wide open. So you can certainly use these kind of mirrorless cameras, which I'm recommending the Micro Four Thirds G series, kind of like a studio camera. You can also use them as a vlogging camera like I'm doing, but just be aware, the camera does not have image stabilization at all. At least this model doesn't. Panasonic does make some lenses that are image stabilized. I just don't happen to have any. This is a manual focus third-party lens. But just know that if you are walking around with one of these kind of rigs on a little short selfie stick, you're going to have to be a little bit more careful about camera movement, right? And about how you walk. But it's certainly doable. It is certainly possible to do some good vlogging and good shooting with one of these rigs. And yes, you can also use one of these Panasonic cameras as a close-up camera if your lens focus is that close. This is the minimal focus distance with this Rokinon lens. It's about 4 inches maybe. This camera has focus peaking on the screen, so I can see what is sharply focused by just looking at the screen or through the viewfinder. And so these are also usable cameras for shooting close-up stuff, but they're not ideal necessarily. However, it's best use case here is really because I'm using a manual focus lens, and this lens is not image stabilized, neither is the camera. The best use case is really going to be like shooting in your studio, the main still studio camera. This has an external mic jack, the G7 does, so there's a variety of microphones you can use with it, and I always advise to use external mics when you can get away with it. Sometimes you can't. This kind of a camera is great for a budget studio setup camera. Micro Four Thirds, pretty good quality of video, 4K, it's a crop mode, you need a wider lens. The inexpensive wide lenses are manual focus. Well, okay, so this is the Canon Vixia 80 camcorder in, well, it's a 1080p camera, but I have the wide-angle adapter lens on it. Okay, so let's just take that off. Okay, so I'm going to have to back up now. I'm not using any external microphones. Okay, so one of the good things about the Canon, maybe the best of all these cameras, is it not only has autofocus, but it's tracking the face really good. I mean, this is the thing. It's a really small sensor, wide depth of focus, the lack of dynamic range of a small sensor, etc., etc. But tracks focus really good, has a really long telephoto zoom. It's literally about arm's length. It's an okay vlogging distance, although I would have to be holding a long handheld tripod selfie stick to really be able to do it. But, you know, with the attachment lens now, you can get closer. Okay, so this is the Canon Vixia 80. I am not using the external wide-angle lens adapter, and I'm not using an external microphone. Now, here's the thing about the Vixia 80. It has a mic jack, but it won't work with unamplified mics. So in other words, that Comica mic that I was using into the GoPro works fine because the GoPro's preamps are okay. This requires an amplified microphone in order to work. And also, this does not have a hot or cold shoe on the camera itself for mounting a microphone. So if you do want to use an external mic, you're going to have to come up with a L bracket, some kind of solution to mount it next to the camera. And so, these little camcorders aren't that bad. They have pretty good stabilization. This is kind of stabilized, not as good as the GoPro. And it does have face detect autofocus tracking, and it's tracking my face pretty good. But you can see I have a lot of blown out highlights. I think the dynamic range on these is not as good as on the GoPro and other action cameras. But really where these little camcorders work the best, I think, at least this one, is in the context of using it for shooting close-up videos of things you're working on, whether that's arts and crafts or in my case maybe repairing typewriters or whatever. That's the best usage case. I have the Canon Vixia set to maybe 6 or 7 inches away from the typewriter, and I can still zoom in. You have a lot of zoom range, even close up, to get right into the mechanics of these machines if you want to video the operation of them. And I'm using a little handheld LED light as an example of what you can do with these little Canons. I think these are really just about ideal for shooting close-up stuff because it focus tracks. Right now the focus box is right about there, and it does a really good job. Okay, in conclusion, if you happen to have an older GoPro like the Hero 7 Black, its best use case is going to be shooting it in 2.7K, so you get better than 1080p resolution, but you still have good stabilization. And using this in bright outdoor light in the context of walking around and talking, that kind of video, where you're not being super too close. You can get these external cages and use a close focus filter like I sometimes do with this camera, but to do that, it also makes the edge of the picture a little bit softer. Keep in mind, these cameras don't have autofocus. They're fixed focus, and they're not really set to focus close up. They're set to focus far away because of outdoor action. So that's the best use case for this. Walking and talking around outside, they're great. And if you get the external microphone adapter that plugs into this, you can plug in an external mic and get better audio. Okay, secondly, for older camcorders, these 1080p camcorders, they're only a few $100s, and this one is the Vixia HFR 80. The best use case for this camcorder really is because it has such good stabilization and it has such a long zoom lens, optical telephoto zoom. Its best use case is for getting right up close to stuff and filming close-ups of like you working with something with your hands or cleaning a typewriter, anything kind of intricate close-up video. And also it makes a good overhead cam for shooting down on a table if you're doing kind of a DIY kind of a video like that. So these are really great for that purpose. They're only a few $100s, and it's just the stabilization and the optics are so good. Yes, you can get external wide-angle lenses to make them a little bit wider in view, but generally the image quality suffers a little bit from that. Having said that, these do have a great use case for that kind of special use, close-up, detail kind of work. And then I think a great alternative to a really expensive full-frame camera as your main studio camera is get a micro four thirds camera. Get one with an external mic jack. If you're getting a Panasonic Lumix, get at least the G7. It'll have a mic jack. It'll shoot in a cropped 4K mode. There's a lot of lenses for this system, including these manual focus Rokinon and other brands, manual focus kind of cinema lenses that give you a lot of good capability for when you're in a fixed studio setting and you don't really need autofocus that much for just a talking headshot. This kind of a camera is a great value proposition for your main studio camera, and it gives you a lot of flexibility because of interchangeable lenses, and they're fairly inexpensive. I think the lesson of this video for you to take away is know the limitations of your gear and know what the strengths are and play to the strengths. You don't have to be buying new camera gear every 6 months just to keep up with the Joneses or just to keep up with the latest stuff. You can use older equipment, know what the strengths are, know what the best use cases are, and avoid the use cases where it doesn't work so well. And sometimes a combination of several older, inexpensive cameras can do you just fine instead of spending a lot of money on a really expensive piece of kit. Well, I hope this was helpful for you guys. If you want to get started in YouTube and don't want to spend a super lot amount of money, older camera gear can work for you. And as always, I wish you the very best. Stay creative and have a great day. Bye-bye for now.